Thank you very much, Christy. So I'm excited to be jumping into lesson 4 with you. Just to summarize what we've started with already as we've gone through this STEAM on Board series is we've begun to work in mBlock. And mBlock's a block-based programming language where we can make animations and interactive projects and games. And then as we continue to learn, we'll learn how we can use mBlock to program MakeBlock hardware as well. But in mBlock, we have looked at the interface and we learned about all the different parts of mBlock. We learned how to make our panda, our character panda, say things using the speech bubbles and the looks blocks. On our last session on Thursday, we in lesson 3 went ahead and programmed Panda to showcase his hidden talents of being able to transform and transfigure into some really neat different looks effects that are available in mBlock. And then we also looked at using keyboard input to do that. So we used various keyboard input, the up and down and left and right arrows, as well as the WASD key. So I'm going to go ahead and move over to the files to show you a little bit about what you have downloaded. So when you get the files from MakeBlock each week, inside of the folder, you're going to get a lesson plan, a slides presentation, as well as mBlock example programs. And this week's lesson has 4 programs that come along with the lesson as well. So we're going to be working through this lesson together here in the next hour, and we're going to be working through both the lesson plan, the slides, as well as working in mBlock. So if you don't have the files downloaded, I suggest you do that, as well as go ahead and get mBlock open. If you have installed mBlock, you can open it from your desktop. If you have not installed mBlock, you can open it from the mBlock website, and Patrick will throw that in the link where you can use the mBlock the online web app to program as well. You do not have to have it installed to work along today. So when we do these lessons, I am not only teaching you the content of the lesson as though you are a student in my classroom, I'm also walking you through teaching tips and looking at the behind the scenes pieces of the lessons that are there for you as an instructor or parent to work with your learner. So we'll continue with that format as we move along. I will be interjecting different teacher tips as well as talking to you about the content of lesson 4. So with no farther delay, let's go ahead and get into lesson 4, walk in place. So lesson 4 continues with our character panda, but last week we were able to make Panda transform, but we still have not taught Panda how to walk. If you haven't noticed, Panda doesn't know how to walk anywhere yet. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to break walking into 2 lessons. So lesson 4 has Panda walking in place, and we learn a little bit about animation and animating a sprite using costumes. And then lesson 5 is where we'll actually combine both the animation as well as motion in mBlock to go ahead and move Panda while walking in place in the animation. So each lesson is broken down with a typical lesson plan. We have our objectives, our overview of the lesson, our key focus, as well as our national standards alignment. And then we will have a warm-up, some guided practice, as well as independent practice, and then we'll close up with some quiz in our wrap-up. And so you can see a breakdown of that in previous videos. So today's lesson, like I said, we'll be looking at animation and animating a sprite. We're going to use the costumes interface for the first time, so we're going to find how to get there and how to use that interface. We're going to learn about loops in computer programming, which is a very powerful block to be using to control our programs. We're going to look at 2 specific loops, the forever and the repeat blocks, and we'll see how those can work and how they are different as well as similar. And then we will learn how to use the wait block, which is also extremely helpful in working with mBlock projects. So We're also going to explore digital 2D animation in this lesson. We're going to learn how to give our sprites the appearance of movement, that animation effect, and we'll do that through costumes. And let's go ahead and begin. So each lesson starts with a review of the previous lesson's content. I like to use the PowerPoint at this point, or the slides. So I'm going to move over to the slides, and what you'll start to notice in some of the slides in this lesson and in future lessons are that the slides begin to have animations and videos in them because we want to show the functionality of some of the mBlock programs. So specifically, you'll see that the slides for this lesson have animated GIFs in them so that you can see the slides and how they work and see the project. So we are going to begin with reviewing 2 examples from last week's lesson. So as a reminder, last week we looked at, on Thursday, we looked at having our panda introduce, have an introduction and then change effects. So we did introduction in lesson 2, and then we changed effects in lesson 3. So we can see that this example program here combines those skills from lesson 2 and lesson 3. So we have Panda saying, well, when the space key is pressed is our event that triggers that action. And we say, it's too hot, I'm going to bloat. And then Panda gets bigger. And then Panda says, I'm about to melt. And Panda's pixelate effect is increased by 25. Okay, that's one example of what a student could have created, or just a review of how we can combine the blocks that we're learning about in all of these lessons. As we move forward in lessons, you'll see that we continue to combine all the different blocks that we're learning. That's really what makes mBlock a beautiful programming language, is that the possibilities are really endless of how you combine all of these blocks together to make the project you're trying to make. So here's another example. When the up arrow key is pressed, say it's too cold for 2 seconds, change the size by -10, so Panda is shrinking a little bit. Say I'm freezing my toes off, and then change the mosaic effect by 25, increase it by 25. And in the lesson plan, so remember the lesson plan gives the teacher the teaching tips. You can see that those lessons that I just those examples that I just explained by speaking and talking through them, there's also explanations in the lesson plan for you as the teacher as well. So we're going to continue to build upon our learning, and we're going to actually stay in the looks category. Just a little sneak peek. As we go through this lesson, we're going to stay in the looks category, or the looks block area, which is the purple block. So we're continuing to explore the blocks that are in that part of the blocks area. Before we begin programming in mBlock, we need to learn a little bit about how animation works. So has anybody ever created a flipbook animation before? Do we know what a flipbook animation is? So a flipbook animation is a paper animation where you take like a notebook or a stack of papers and you draw an image. And on each page, you make the image slightly different, or you move it just a little bit. And then when you flip the pages together, it looks like a moving cartoon. So so that's what we're going to see here in this example. Here is a flipbook, and you can see it's a bunch of pages of paper that when you thumb through them or flip the pages, because each image is slightly different, it gives the appearance of movement. Each one of those pages is really just one still image. But when you play the still images very quickly, which is what happens when you flip the book, you end up with what appears to be animation. That's exactly how animation works. So where do we see animation? If you want to throw in the chat box, What type of animation do we see? When do you see animation? When we're looking at animation all around us, we have cartoons on our television, right? We have various cartoons that are drawn, movies, animated movies. What about GIFs? GIFs on the computer. If you like posting GIFs and comments on Twitter or sending them to your friends, those are actually just a series of images. And we'll see one in an example in a moment that's a computer created. This one we see right now is drawn by on paper. So we also have animations in icons. So maybe an icon on your desktop or on your cell phone, it moves a little bit. That is an example of a 2D animation, a two-dimensional animation. We may also see like a loading bar. When you have a loading bar across a screen or a spinning circle loading bar, those are all examples of 2D animation. So when we are working with digital animation, we create 2D animations using individual drawings or individual pictures to create this appearance of movement, okay, this animation. And when the images are played quickly, they look like a moving cartoon, just like the Flipbook. So here's an example of a Blowfish animation. Okay, here is one of our sprites or characters in mBlock who has some different costumes. And these different images are used to make our Blowfish have this animation. Our Blowfish is changing its face. So the lesson plan walks through the images that were used to create that, but you could see them while it was animating as well. There are 4 images used to create that. A little vocabulary, each one of those images is called a frame in that animation. But that is how this animation is created. It's 4 different images that are played in a certain sequence for a certain amount of time each image. It's pretty neat. We're going to see that we can do this same thing in mBlock. We can make these same animations in mBlock. And we're going to do that using costumes. So as with previous lessons, I'm going to go ahead and move over to mBlock at this time, but the slides do continue with the step-by-step instruction, as does the lesson plan. The lesson plan continues with the steps. I'm going to stay in mBlock and I'm going to walk us through creating this in mBlock. So at this time, if you do not have mBlock open, you may go ahead and open mBlock. And we will be working with a new file. So when you open mBlock for the first time, you open to a new blank file, which is what we want. So if you had a different file open, go ahead and make a new one. So when we are in mBlock, we're going to see that we need to always go to the Sprites tab, because right now we're working with sprites. We do not have any devices connected. And we're going to see that Panda is our default character. And right now, we've only ever seen Panda standing. He looks this way. But we're going to explore and see that Panda actually has 2 costumes. So let's go in our Sprites tab area. In remember, the side of the screen is called the Stage area. There is a Costumes button. The Costumes button is how we navigate to the Costumes interface. The Costumes interface. So let's click on Costumes. And we have a whole new area appear on the right side of our screen. This is the Costumes interface. Okay? And it is the area of mBlock where we can see the different costumes available for each sprite. So if I had multiple sprites in this project, each sprite would have different costumes appear in the Costumes interface. Now, just some navigation. You may have noticed down here in the the sprites tab of the stage area, our costumes button has changed to an X because that became our exit button. We will use that in a moment to leave the costumes interface. So in our costumes interface, we have an editing area where we can make changes and edit our costumes. At this time, we're not going to explore how to edit costumes, but what we do want to do while we are here is we want to look at the two different costumes that came installed or already there by default for our panda. Panda has two costumes. Okay, so I want you to take a moment. And click costume 2, costume 1, costume 2, and then in the chat box, tell me what you see Panda doing. What does it appear? What type of motion does it look like Panda is doing? So if you click on costume 1 and then costume 2 quickly, alternating between both costumes, what are we observing? What do we see? Okay, Panda's walking. Exactly, Panda is walking. Okay, and so with Panda walking, we're going to see how we can now actually make a program that uses these two costumes, because right now we have not actually programmed anything. We are manually clicking on costume 1 and costume 2 just to see what those costumes are. But right now we have not programmed Panda to do anything. Remember, the great thing about being computer programmers is that I get to tell the computer what I want it to do. So I get to tell my mBlock project exactly or precisely what actions to take. And we have not yet made a program to tell Panda what to do. So with our help so far, Panda has been able to speak using the say blocks, and has been able to showcase transformations to all the new friends that Panda met on Earth. Where Panda's from, creatures teleport. So Panda's never had to walk before. So Panda doesn't know how to walk. So we're going to begin to teach Panda how to walk. We're going to write a program to teach Panda how to walk. So we know Panda has two costumes. We no longer need the costume interface. So let's exit out using the exit button. Let's close out of the costume interface so we can get to our script area and our block area again. So we can see both of those. As a reminder, I am following along in the lesson plan. And all of those talking points that I just mentioned are in the lesson plan for you to teach to your learner. So we're going to now begin to work in mBlock in the hands-on or guided practice portion of this lesson. So we're going to use a few different concepts to make Panda walk. Okay? So first things first, we know that Panda has more than one costume. We now need to learn how to switch those costumes using programming blocks. So the programming block that we're going to use today is the next costume block. It is purple, which means it is in the same block area as the blocks we were using last week. It's in the looks block area. So what does this block do? When a sprite has multiple costumes, it switches the sprite costume to the next costume. So did you see how our costumes were stacked? They were in order in the column. So it's going to go down that column in order when we use this block. Now, if a sprite only has one costume, this button, if you put it in a program, this block, it will do nothing. This block will not actually do anything if a sprite does not have multiple costumes. So it's important we check how many costumes a sprite has to make sure that there are multiple costumes available in order to use the next costume block. So again, we're going to go back to mBlock and let's program this. Let's begin. So the event that we're going to use is when the space key is pressed. I'm going to give you a moment. Go and try and do that on your own. If you've watched previous lessons, you should be able to program this without my help. When the space key is pressed is an events block, so go ahead and find that block, as well as go to the looks category and find the next costume block. For those of you that are new, I'll go ahead and walk through those steps. The events category, when you click the category, it takes you to different blocks for that category. When the space key is pressed, and then we go to the looks category, next costume. When the space key is pressed, next costume. As a reminder, the blocks automatically snap to each other so that you know that they are connected. It's very important when programming in mBlock that we decompose or break down our problems into sub-problems or smaller problems, and we test and run each portion of our solution. So right now, we are going to test this to make sure that our costumes are working, our next costume block works. So to test this, you're going to press the space key, and you should, every time you press the space key, see Panda move. And I'm going to increase my stage area so you can see it. But every time I press the space key, Panda should go to the next costume. Now, I want to point out a feature of mBlock that we have not yet discussed. In the script area, when a script is running, the script will have a little yellow glowing border around it. So if you watch closely, it blinks over here. Okay, we're going to see that yellow border as we continue with this lesson, but that's what it means when you see the code block glowing with a yellow border. It means that block of code is executing or running. So it would be very cumbersome to sit here and press space over and over and over and over and over again. So that's not really the best way to teach Panda how to walk. So in mBlock, actions can be programmed to occur multiple times using a loop. Okay, so we're going to learn about what a loop is. A loop is a repeated execution. It's something that repeats. We want that block of code or blocks of code to repeat over and over and over and over again. Okay, that is a loop. And that is what we're going to learn next. We're going to look at two loops in mBlock, the forever block and the repeat block. The forever block and the repeat block. So what is the difference between these two blocks? Well, we're going to explore and see for ourselves in mBlock the difference between the two. But the forever block will continuously repeat the blocks nested inside of it. It will not stop until the entire project is stopped. Okay, so the forever block will repeat forever until we stop. And we learned in a previous lesson that we can click the stop sign to stop our program. The repeat block or the repeat loop repeats the nested blocks inside, and this one is 10 or whatever number we type inside. So this block that we see on the screen will repeat the nested blocks inside 10 times and then it will stop. Okay, so let's follow some steps to do this. And actually, I'm going to let you do this one on your own, and then I'll come back and show you. So what you'll notice as we continue with this lesson and future lessons, the step-by-step instructions are no longer going to keep telling students and telling you where to go each step at a time. You're going to start to see instructions like step 2 here, where it says find and select the appropriate blocks from the block area to create the following program. So you're going to start to see a whole program or a portion of a program, and you're going to just look at that and be able to use your prior knowledge that you've learned in mBlock so far to find these blocks. Now remember, the blocks are color coded. Also, when you're working with these blocks, The block area is located on each one of these tables in the slides. So this block area for our loops is a new area we haven't been to. It's an orange area. The orange area is control. So I want you to try to find these blocks when the space key is pressed, forever next costume. And then press the space key to see what happens. So for many of you, you probably already have that working, but I want to show you a trick. If you watch on the screen, when you grab a loop, remember the shadow shows where our block is going to attach. The shadow shows where it's going to attach. If I drag my forever block up, do you see how it automatically attaches around my next costume block by itself? Do you see that shadow is showing around? That's very helpful. Remember, those shadows are helpful for you to know where you're putting your block. So encourage your students to pay attention to the shadows and use the shadows. Okay, so here's our program. When the space key is pressed, forever next costume. Okay, many of you already know what's about to happen. So now when I press the space key, I don't know if I'd call that walking. That's a pretty fast walk. Panda appears to be running extremely fast in place. Okay. Do you remember how I said there's a glowing yellow border around the program when it is running? Do you see the glowing yellow border? Okay. Now, what do I do to stop this? Anybody want to put in the chat? How do I stop this? He's like going to get really exhausted. Panda's going to be really worn out if we don't stop our program. So what do I need to do to stop my program? Okay, I'm getting some chats that say, give Panda a break. Stop. Use my stop button, which is this red button in the stage area. The red button in the stage area. Man, Panda's pretty exhausted. Okay, so we've looked at the forever loop. We've looked at the yellow, the forever loop, the orange forever loop in the control section. But I told you there's another loop that we're going to look at today. So we need to practice again deleting blocks. We learned how to delete blocks in the last lesson. But we want to replace the forever block with the repeat block. Let me show you something. Okay, let me show you something. If I try to put the repeat, it's going to put it around the forever. That's not what I want. I want to replace. But I could do this. I could put the repeat inside. But again, that's not what I want. So I'm going to drop my repeat block over to the side. You can put blocks in your script area and just have them there for a holding area temporarily. It's not going to be a problem to put your blocks in the extra area that they're not attached to an event. Okay, now if I want to delete the forever block, but I don't want to delete the next costume block, we did not learn how to do that last week. How do I do that? Okay. If I drag this over, you will notice that it drags the entire chunk or blocks of code. It takes all those blocks of code that are nested inside with it. I don't want to delete all of those, okay? So in order to do this properly, the correct sequence is to take the nested block outside of it, and you can set it to the side, or in this case, I can drop it inside of the repeat block because that's where I want it to be. Then once you get this block all by itself, then you can delete it back over and put your blocks back together in the sequence that you want them to be. So go ahead and take a moment to build when the space key is pressed, repeat 10 times next costume. Okay, we're going to press the space key and watch what happens. I'm going to do that again because it goes very quickly. Watch again. Okay, and every time I press the space key, that glowing yellow border appears. Okay? So at this point in the lesson, you want your students to be making their own observations. The goal here is for students to start to realize for themselves the differences between these blocks. Because you as the instructor or the parent, you're not going to have enough time in a classroom to teach every single block and all the intricacies of every block. But a lot of these blocks, your students can start to observe the differences on their own. So encourage your students to describe the difference between these two programs, the forever next costume and the repeat 10 times next costume. The lesson plan does explain that difference for you as the instructor, but it is not included in the slides. The difference here is that when the forever block is used, Panda will continuously to change costumes and the program will not stop running. Not on its own, we have to stop it. When the repeat 10 times block is used, the program stops running after Panda changed costumes 10 times. Okay, so that is the difference. So as we observed, Panda was not walking. Panda was running very, very, very fast. So we need to slow down Panda, okay? What you'll notice about mBlock programs is that they will run as fast as your computer processor can run them, okay? They run very, very fast, to like a split second sometimes the actions will be, okay? So in order to see this animation more clearly, we need to slow down our blocks. And for this, we're going to learn the wait block. Now, the wait block is an orange block, which means it is a control block. You'll notice that the categories describe, the block area describes the type of block that's in that category. A wait block and the loop block affect control of our program. It's how we can control the sequence or the running or the execution of our program. So I think the wait block is pretty self-explanatory. This would be a great time to ask your learner, what do you think the wait block is going to do? What do you think the wait block is going to do? Okay. And we'll see here in this chart that the wait block will pause the program and wait the specified amount of time. We'll pause the program and wait the specified amount of time. Now, something to notice in our example, the wait block can use a decimal. You can put a decimal in this block. You can put a decimal in lots of the blocks in mBlock. Now, we can't repeat a fraction of a time. So we couldn't say repeat 1.5 times because that's not really possible. That needs to be a whole number. But when it comes to seconds or it comes to steps and things like that, you can use fractions, okay? So we're going to go back to mBlock and we're going to put in here a decimal, a wait half a second, just like the example. So remember, you can change what's written in this block. You can either do that while it is in the block area by clicking in the white circle and changing the value, or you can change the value once you have placed the block over on your script area in your program. We're going to add the wait block underneath the next costume. And I'm going to read this code for you. I'm going to read this code for you. We're going to say when the space key is pressed, repeat this section of code 10 times. Change to the next costume, wait 0.5 seconds, repeat this again. So we want the wait to be inside. Some of your students might put the wait after. But if we read that, we're going to say change the costume 10 times, then wait 0.5 seconds. Instead of change the costume, wait 0.5 seconds, then change the costume again. So it's important that we think about the sequence of our events and where we want those actions to take place. It's also very helpful to encourage your students to read their code. When your students or your learners ask you for help, one of the best strategies you can use is say, read to me what this code is doing. Because oftentimes they don't read it line by line and they're missing something. And so they say, well, it's doing this. They'll describe it, but they won't read it. So I would encourage you to have your learners read the code top to bottom when they have a problem, because they'll say, oh, well, I told it to wait 0.5 seconds, but did you tell it to wait in the right spot? So encourage them to read their code instead of just describe what it does, because there's a little bit of a difference there, and you want them to pay attention to the sequence, and they'll do that when they read it. Okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind in the lesson plans as well is there are these time out portions, and there have been some of those in the previous lessons as well when we learned how to save and things like that. This is a tip on how to duplicate code, So let's say I wanted to have, for my example program, I wanted to have one that said forever and one that says repeat. You can right click on the code and choose duplicate. We learned this last week as well, but it's in this lesson, so I want to reiterate it. And it will make a copy that you can place on your stage, on your script area. And I'm going to change this to the up arrow just so it uses a different event trigger. So the up arrow is forever, it will never stop, and the space key is 10 times. And for some of you, that 0.5 seconds might be a little slow. Okay, for some of you, that 0.5 seconds might be a little slow. Okay, so we learned about positive and negative values. We learned about higher and lower values last week. So we learned how higher and lower values can change our sequence. And in this case, we're waiting half a second. If I wanted it to go faster, what value could I put into that block instead of half a second? What value could I put in that block? Would anybody like to share? I could decrease the value. Perfect. 0.2, 0.3, 0.25. Any of those would work. Go ahead and try that on yours. You know, I can decrease that value a little bit. So I'll go down to 0.25. And now when I press the space key, Panda walks a little bit faster. Great observation. Good job. So the lesson plan has a few questions for you to work with your learner on. So it's to have your students answer questions, explain the difference between two loops explored in this lesson, the forever and the repeat, which we've already done, so I'm not going to have you do that again. And then what you just demonstrated to me was question number 2, which of the following would cause an animation in mBlock to be slower? And you told me that the lower number is faster and the higher number is slower because we're waiting a longer time. So you guys already answered that question. And then which block should be used to make an animation appear slower in mBlock? And we have established that the wait block allows us to do that. So now on to the independent practice portion of this lesson. The independent practice portion of this lesson. So in this activity, we have students program a walk-in-place animation. It's just a quick animation where Panda is going to say, I can walk in place, and then start moving. And while Panda is moving, Panda will shout the costume number of 1 or 2, whichever costume that is on, and then we will add an appropriate background to this project. Okay? And as a reminder, each independent practice activity with the lessons includes an extension activity. It includes an extension activity. And the extension activity gives you different ideas for your students to complete. If they are finished ahead of time, maybe they're working a little faster than others in the class, or maybe they've already used similar programs to mBlock, so they already understand some of how mBlock works. So they're moving a little faster as well. It's a great opportunity for you to challenge those learners with added features to their project. So in this case, you can, after Panda walks in place a certain number of times, Panda can say, I can stand still, and then take 2 more steps before stopping completely. You can add transformation effects, those effects that we learned last week. While Panda is walking, maybe Panda transforms as well. And maybe we want to change the event that triggers Panda to walk, so we can change the event. In this example that we did together, we used the space key is pressed. You know, some other ideas is maybe you have different keys being pressed to control different speeds. So like I have here, the space key makes him walk faster, and the up arrow is slower. Okay, so you can add that feature in as well. Now, I want to give us an opportunity to try to do this independent practice. So we want Panda to say, I can walk in place, and then start moving. So would anybody like to, in the chat, remind me which block I need to make Panda say something, and where do I find that block? Which block do I need, and where do I find that block in order to have Panda say something? I want to program Panda to say something. And we learned this in lesson 2. Okay, so I want to go to the looks. I'm hearing in the chat that I want to go to the looks section. Okay. And when I'm in the look section, I want to find, yes, it's purple. Great. And I'm looking for the say block. Great. So when I press the space key, I'm going to have Panda say, and I'm just going to move that out of the way, say, and we're going to say, walk, I can walk in place. Because remember, Panda didn't know how to walk in place until we told Panda how to walk in place, okay? Say, I can walk in place for 2 seconds, and then we're going to have it repeat 10 times, go to the next costume, and wait 0.25 seconds. Okay. Now, how do I have Panda say? How do I have Panda say a costume? I'm going to use that same block, but I got to do a few things here. So I'm going to say number 1, and instead of, well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do the 2 for 2 seconds. I'm going to do the right one that's not for a certain duration. I'm going to have Panda say 1. Okay, costume 1. Now, why did I choose the one that does not have a time on it? I did that because, remember, Panda will say that until we tell Panda to say something else. So it will be replaced with whatever the next say block says. So it will continue to say 1 until we tell it to say something else. Now, we can duplicate this. So we're going to have it say costume 1, wait 0.25 seconds, and then say costume 2, wait 2.5. Now, I'm going to slow this down a little bit because we want to be able to read it, and 0.25 might go a little fast. So now when I press the space key, we can see Panda say, I can walk in place, and then switch back and forth between 1 and 2 while Panda walks. Now, that would not be a guided practice activity. It would be a very quick end of your lesson to let your learners try it on their own. I just wanted to take the time, since this lesson was a little shorter, to do that with you today. So as a reminder, I want to remind you that there are example programs with your downloads. And so specifically for lesson 4, your example programs, example 1 is going to be that first example that we did in the lesson, which is when the space key is pressed, next costume. Example 2 is going to be the when the space key is pressed forever. And example 3 is going to be the wait, using the wait in that example. And then the last program test is going to be the answer key or the example for the independent practice. So when you look at these lessons and you look at these downloads, you have the files needed as the instructor to know what your learners should be programming. We don't expect you to know all the answers on your own, so we do provide those in the example files for you. Lastly, if we head back to our slides, we have our quiz or our review at the end. So in the chat box, let's see if we can get these quiz questions correct. Which of the following blocks is not in the control block area? This was our first time using the control block area. And which of these blocks is not a control block? Which of these blocks is not a control block? Great, we have a lot of answers for D. Very good. Okay. Which block area does next costume belong to? Which block area does next costume belong to? Okay, we're getting, I believe, more answers for D. It's hard to tell because I think that was the same answer from the last one. The chat box is hard to tell. Okay, and which of the following codes can make the sprite say, I'm fine for 3 times? I'm fine for 3 times. And I see a few answers coming in again. And the answer for this one is going to be D. And let's explain that because I have a few different answers coming in the chat. So the first program, let's read the first program together. And this is where reading the code instead of just looking at it can be very helpful. So we're going to start at the top. When the green flag is clicked, say I'm fine for 2 seconds, then say I'm fine. Okay? How many times does option A say I'm fine? How many times did option A say I'm fine? Okay, twice. Option A said I'm fine twice. It said for the first time 2 seconds, and then it said it again forever until it says something else. Okay, let's look at option B. Option B says when the green flag is clicked, say I'm fine for 3 seconds. How many times did option B say I'm fine? Option B said I'm fine for only 1 time. It stayed on there for 3 seconds, but it said I'm fine only once. Okay? Option C, when the green flag is clicked, say I'm fine for 1 second, say I'm fine for 1 second, say I'm fine for 1 second. Repeat this 10 times. How many times did I say I'm fine in option 3? Okay, 30, because we got to look at that repeat 10 times. That's a lot of times. Man, I'd be tired of saying it over and over and over again. Okay, option D, when the green flag is clicked, repeat 3 times. Say I'm fine for 1 second. So say I'm fine for 1 second, repeat this 3 times. Now you can see that option D says I'm fine 3 times, which is the question that we were trying to answer. So the answer to this question is option D. One last reminder before we finish out our lesson. The lesson plan does have those answers to the questions in there, as well as the sample code as well for the independent practice. So the lesson plan has all of that in there for you as you review the lesson plan as the instructor. But when we go back to the mBlock website, when we go to the mBlock website, and we go to the community page, I want to remind you that I mentioned in the lesson 2 and lesson 3, the lesson 2 and lesson 3 videos about creating an online mBlock account. And on your mBlock account, you can upload your programs and save them in the cloud, which is very helpful because then you can use multiple devices and have all your projects there. But there is a Steam Onboard, not there, sorry, down at the bottom, there is a Steam Onboard studio. There's a studio for this workshop. And we encourage you, as you make your projects, take some time to play with your projects and add more features to them, add a background to Panda walking, and go ahead and upload your projects to this studio. It's okay that you're a beginner learner. If you're new to this, that's okay. We would love to see the projects that you're building and working as we go through these lessons. So to do that, you upload your project to your account, you publish it, you copy the URL, and you just add your project here to contribute your project to this studio. So we want to build a studio of projects throughout the course. We don't need to wait until the very end to only publish the really complex ones. The beginner projects can be very helpful for other instructors to use and see as well. So you're helping others out by uploading here as well. And it'll allow us to build that Steam on Board community with you all. So we look forward to our next lesson, which is on Thursday, and we're going to actually move Panda forward on Thursday. So we're going to take what we learned today and move Panda forward. I'll pass it back to Christy, and I'm sure if you have any questions, Christy will allow time for that. But thank you guys for the opportunity to teach lesson 4 today. I had some fun.
Yeah, thanks, Rosemary. Once again, just want to remind everyone that about 24 hours after this time, you should receive an email in your inbox that will contain a link to the video for today's lesson on our YouTube channel. You can go to our YouTube channel and access any of our prior lessons. So if you would like detailed instructions on how to post to our community and save your projects, that is at the end of lesson 3. So please go back and review that if you'd missed it. There's great information in there. And I guess, yeah, we just want to thank everyone for attending. We're going to leave the chat box open here, and you're welcome to ask questions of us. We'll hang out here for a few minutes.
And there's 2 things I want to say, Christy, that are in the questions.
Yeah.
So there was a question regarding, do you need to sign up for each webinar separately? If you've already registered for the webinars and you received the invitation for this webinar, this is the same webinar invitation that you will receive every Tuesday and Thursday until we have completed this series of webinars. So you only need to register and sign up once, and you will continue to get the invitations and reminders in your inbox every week. And it is the same link, so you can continue to use that each week and put it on your calendar. The other thing is there is a feedback form. I've posted it in the chat box. I'll post it there again. We are reading the feedback on a weekly basis. It helps inform how we're moving forward. So if you have a moment, if there's something that you would like to see in the future, we will take into account your feedback. So I've put the feedback form in the chat box for you.